You've been in rooms full of people and felt completely alone. You've had conversations where you smiled, nodded, said the right things, and then gone home and thought, nobody actually knows me. And the worst part, you don't know if that's their fault or yours. You've probably Googled it at some point. Why do I feel like I don't belong anywhere? Why do I feel like an outsider? Why do I feel different from everyone around me? And you found a lot of answers that almost fit, but not quite. Because the real answer isn't in a list of tips, it's in understanding what's actually happening inside you. I'm going to tell you something today that nobody has ever explained to you properly. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand yourself in a way you never have before. Welcome to the inner room. This is where we go to understand the parts of yourself nobody taught you how to read. I'm glad you're here. Let's go inside. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you were in a conversation, a real one, where you didn't feel like you were performing? Where you didn't have to translate yourself, simplify yourself, shrink yourself? For most people who feel like they don't belong, that moment is rare. And when it does happen, it's so disorienting that they almost don't trust it. They think, this is too easy, something's wrong, this can't last. And sometimes they pull back right when connection was actually possible. Here's what psychology actually tells us about this feeling. Researchers call it social mismatch, the experience of being in an environment that doesn't reflect who you are. And here's what's important. It's not a personality flaw. It's not anxiety. It's not depression. It's not being too sensitive. It's a signal. Your nervous system is telling you, this place, these people, this version of me, it doesn't fit. But here's where it gets complicated, and this is something most people never figure out. There's a difference between not belonging somewhere specific and believing you don't belong anywhere. One is a situation. The other is a story you've started telling yourself. And today, we're going to figure out which one you're actually living in. But before we get to that, I need to tell you where this feeling actually comes from, because it's not what you think. Belonging is not a want, it's a need. In the 1940s, psychologist Abraham Maslow put belonging right in the middle of his famous hierarchy of needs. Not at the top, not optional, right in the middle, between survival and self-worth. Because for our ancestors, being rejected from the group didn't just hurt, it meant death. No food, no shelter, no protection. Your brain is still running that same software. When you walk into a room and feel like you don't fit, your nervous system doesn't just register discomfort, it registers danger. That's why it feels so heavy, so physical, so hard to shake. You're not being dramatic, you're running ancient code in a modern world. And that code was never designed for office parties and awkward networking events. It was designed for survival, for tribe, for deep, consistent belonging with a small group of people who actually knew you. That's what your brain is still searching for. And it's looking for it in a world that has mostly replaced depth with connection requests and group chats. No wonder it can't find it. But here's what nobody tells you about that code. It has a bug. The bug is this. Your brain can't always tell the difference between a room that's genuinely wrong for you and a room where you're afraid to be seen. They feel identical from the inside, and that distinction, that one distinction, changes everything about how you understand your own loneliness. So how do you tell the difference? I'll show you, but first, there's something even more important you need to understand about why some people feel this more than others. Have you ever noticed that some people seem to belong everywhere they go? They walk into a room, any room, within minutes they're laughing, connecting, at ease, and you watch them and think, how? What do they have that I don't? Here's the answer, and it might surprise you. They're not more lovable than you. They're not more interesting. they're just less aware. Research on highly sensitive people, a term coined by psychologist Elaine Aron, shows that about 20% of the population processes the world more deeply than average. They pick up on subtleties others miss. They feel things more intensely. They think more deeply about who they are and where they fit. And they feel like they don't belong far more often than other people. Not because they don't, but because they care more about authentic connection than surface-level belonging. They would rather be alone than be with people who don't actually see them. And the world, which runs mostly on surface-level belonging, doesn't always reward that. There's also something else happening. When you process the world deeply, you pick up on inauthenticity fast. You walk into a room and you sense when the conversation is performative, when the laughter is hollow, when people are saying what they're supposed to say, not what they actually feel. And you disengage, not because you're antisocial, not because you're arrogant, but because something in you refuses to participate in a connection that isn't real. And then you go home and wonder why you feel so alone. So if you feel like you don't belong, there's a real chance it's not because something is wrong with you. It's because you're looking for something most people have stopped looking for. And I want to tell you about someone who felt exactly the same way, because their story changed how I understand this completely.
Think about someone who spent 20 years moving. New city, new job, new social circle. Every few years, a fresh start. Every time they arrived somewhere new, they told themselves, this time it will be different. This time I'll find my people. And every time, within months, the same feeling returned. The smiling at the right moments, the nodding, the going home alone and thinking, still not it. After 20 years, they finally saw a therapist, and the therapist asked them one question. When you imagine the version of you that belongs somewhere, who is that person? What are they like? And they couldn't answer, because they had spent so long adapting to every new room that they had completely lost track of who they were when no one was watching. The problem was never the rooms. The problem was that they kept arriving in new places as a different performance of themselves and wondering why nobody knew them. You can't be known if you don't know who to show them. That's the part that changes everything, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. I said earlier there's a difference between not belonging somewhere specific and believing you don't belong anywhere. Let's break that down, because one of them has a solution, and one of them is a trap. Type 1. Environmental mismatch. You're in the wrong room, wrong job, wrong city, wrong relationship, wrong friend group. The feeling is real, but the problem is external. And the solution is movement, change, finding your people. They exist. The research is very clear on this. There are people out there who will make you feel, for the first time, that you don't have to translate yourself, that you can just be. But you won't find them if you're convinced the problem is you. Type 2. Identity disconnection. You've spent so long adapting to wrong rooms that you've lost track of who you actually are. You don't know what you actually like, what you actually think, what you actually need. Because for years, maybe your whole life, you've been performing a version of yourself that was built to be acceptable, not authentic. You learned early that certain parts of you made people uncomfortable, so you hid them. You learned that being too intense, too deep, too sensitive made you hard to be around, so you turned the volume down. And now you're living at half volume, wondering why nothing feels real. The British psychologist Donald Winnicott had a term for this. He called it the false self. The idea is simple but profound. When a child grows up in an environment that doesn't accept who they really are, they develop a public version of themselves designed to survive that environment. A self that smiles when it should, that agrees when it needs to, that makes itself smaller so the world feels safer. And the tragedy Winnicott identified is that this false self can become so convincing, so automatic, so deeply habitual, that the person forgets it's a performance. They lose access to their true self, not because it disappeared, but because they stopped practicing it. And when you don't know who you are, you can't find where you belong. Because belonging requires you to show up, and you can't show up if you don't know who's showing up. Most people who feel like they don't belong anywhere are actually dealing with type 2, and the work isn't about finding the right room, it's about finding yourself first. So, how do you do that? Here's where we get practical, and I'll give you 3 things you can actually use starting today. Here's the first thing I want you to try. Think of the last time you felt completely yourself, not performing, not translating, just present. Where were you? Who were you with? What were you doing? If you can't remember, that's your answer. The work starts with creating more moments where that feeling is possible. Even if it's alone, even if it's with one person, even if it's just for 10 minutes. The second thing, and this is harder, notice when you're performing. Not to stop it immediately, just to notice. I'm doing the thing right now. I'm shrinking. I'm translating. Because every time you notice it, you create a tiny gap between you and the performance. And in that gap, you remember that you exist outside of it, that there is a you underneath the adaptation, and you, the real one, is worth finding. The third thing, and this is the one most people skip, start asking yourself what you actually think, not what you're supposed to think, not what the room expects you to think. What do you think? About the conversation you just had, about the decision in front of you, about the person you spent time with today. It sounds simple, but if you've spent years suppressing your own perspective to keep the peace, this is one of the most radical things you can do. Because your thoughts, your real ones, are the fingerprints of your true self. And every time you acknowledge them, even privately, even in your journal, even in just your own head, you are practicing being real. And practicing being real is how you find your way back to yourself. Awareness is the first real act of belonging to yourself. And belonging to yourself, that comes before belonging anywhere else. Always. You don't feel like you belong anywhere because you're looking for a place that reflects who you really are. And that person, the real one, has been buried under years of adapting. This is the work of the inner room. Not to tell you where to go, but to help you remember who's going there. If this hit something real for you, write it in the comments. Just one word, whatever came up. I'll see you in the next room.